So I recently beat off and it was an absolutely surreal experience. Of course I'm talking about the 2025 remaster of the cult classic indie RPG initially released in 2008 that inspired other beloved indie RPGs such as Undertale and Omori, and though strongly resembling Earthbound, the creator had never played it until after its initial release, which is mind-boggling. But seriously, I don't think words can fully explain how much this game caught me off guard. I never played the original, so this review is coming from the perspective of someone unfamiliar with any deviations the remaster makes. After playing it, it's wild to see just how influential this game was to any indie RPGs that followed. Though not perfect, Off left me in awe after the credits rolled, leaving me to confront the more appalling facets of life. On the surface, Off is your typical JRPG, with slightly more ambiguity and symbolism tossed in the mix. You control the Batter, a mysterious entity with a Terminator-like determination to carry out his so-called holy mission of purifying the world and ridding it of its ruler, simply known as the Queen. You must go from zone to zone, slapping up each zone's guardian, seemingly liberating the zone from their corruption and misdeeds. But something's off. Before we continue, if you haven't played the game yet, some minor spoilers are ahead. Don't say I didn't warn you. Off's core gameplay is as straightforward as turn-based JRPGs get. You fight in random encounters, gain XP, and level up the Batter and his party members, aka add-ons, raising their base stats so you can square up with stronger baddies and bosses. To be real for a minute, the combat in this game is probably the most okay-ish it could be. It's not terrible, but not the most engaging either, and that's after learning most people felt the same way about the original's combat, despite this remaster polishing it up a bit. The ATB style system, where you wait for the bar to fill up before taking a turn, typically affords a certain level of strategy. However, the lack of clarity in the combat mechanics can be annoying when strategizing, at least for the beginning parts of the game. Not to mention, the element system is full of things typically considered materials like smoke, metal, plastic, meat, and sugar. It's not exactly intuitive, even with the information in a competencies description. Competencies are the game's spells or abilities, and they're unique to each party member and use a resource called CC. I appreciate that party members are meant to have specific combat roles, even if it boils down to just picking the highest damage competencies 70% of the time. All that said, battles mostly felt like wars of attrition. I spent a lot of time chugging down HP and CC recovery items like a person dying of thirst. Not a huge downer, but it's still something to consider. Alright, let's briefly talk about the puzzles, cause god damn does Off have them in spades. I thought some of them were clever in that they contributed to the uncanniness that permeates the game's atmosphere. Many require you to pay attention to the environment and pretty much anything you interact with. Almost all of them force you to take notes to keep track of numbers and number sequences. A few of them are more tedious to get through than others, which doesn't always leave you with a sense of accomplishment. With the new accessibility features, you can press a button to show you a hint if you're stuck on where to go next. If you're in the middle of a puzzle, it can even point you in the right direction, sometimes outright solving it for you. If you love figuring things out independently, I'd recommend going as long as possible before using it. That said, one or two did feel like they weren't worth the time spent and did sort of break the flow of things. Between the combat and the puzzles though, the puzzles were definitely more engaging. Having said that, even more engaging than both was the story, which, along with Off's atmosphere, is where the game truly shines. Off's story is strange, ethereal, and ambiguous, while coincidentally profound and straightforward. While the end goal is clear, you get a sense that how the journey will play out will be anything but typical. The Batter came into the world with one pristine baseball uniform and one purpose: to purify the lands, purging them of invasive specters and the corrupt guardians that control their own zones. Why a Batter whose weapon of choice is that of an American pastime? Who knows, but it's provocative. Anyway, these guardians serve a character called the Queen, who's the primary antagonist. The story doesn't shy away from breaking the fourth wall. As the player, you are immediately acknowledged as the one controlling or guiding the Batter on his sacred mission. The first character that does this to you is a talking cat with a vocabulary reminiscent of V from V for Vendetta, who places his faith in you to do the right thing, whatever that may be. As you move from zone to zone, you gradually understand how the world of Off operates. Each zone represents different forms of industrial production, where 5 elements essential for the continued existence of the zones are manufactured or distributed to the others. Seas are made of liquid plastic, smoke is necessary to breathe, metal and meat are somehow harvested from cows, and sugar, harvested in the most gruesome way you can imagine, is used to help the Elson, Off's general population, cope with their existence. The word unconventional doesn't even begin to describe it. Aside from one major instance, there aren't really any any choices to make as you move through the plot. However, it's more about the inevitable choices you quote-unquote have to make, despite many instances throughout your journey that will give you pause. The batter is unflinching in his motivation to purify the world, to the point where his stoic determination perturbs other characters. It for sure fed into that pervasive sense of dread that intensified as I approached the game's end. Like I said, Off's story isn't necessarily hard to follow. You're told the batter has a mission and you're simply there to help him carry it out. Even so, as you learn more about the world via dialogue, weird sequences with images straight out of a madman's sketchbook, and environmental clues you inspect, you realize just how subjective it all is. You also learn relatively early on that the ending to this tale will be anything but happy. Off resonates strongly because of its commitment to being candid and, well, off-putting. It's meant to be disconcerting. It challenges your sense of right and wrong. The strange twists and bizarre details along the way point to a singular artistic vision, but that's why the story and the way it explores its themes are so memorable. It subverts expectations and also does the opposite all at once. Just when I thought the narrative might throw me a curveball, it stayed its course, constantly building on that sense of dread until its ultimate conclusion. Also, its ambiguity is part of why it has endured for so long. It's pretty easy to see how Off has influenced the likes of other indie RPGs such as Omori and Undertale. It's also easy to see how far indie game storytelling has come since its original release. Of course, it still stands as a fantastic piece of art in its own right, but in retrospect, it doesn't really delve too deeply into its central themes. Don't get it twisted, its influence can't be understated. It's foundational to the indie RPG scene, which is why I'm still glad I got to recently experience it after being a little late to the party. Off will be on my mind for a long time. One of my sole complaints though is that due to the game's short runtime, I felt like I still needed to spend a little bit more time in its world and let the themes cook for just a bit more. As far as games go though, that's not a terrible problem to have. It still does a lot in a short time. Regardless, the story didn't do it alone. I genuinely believe that the story wouldn't have felt nearly as poignant without Off's visual direction and music. It'd be kinda crazy not to talk about the most noticeable and unconventional aspect of this game, the visual design. Clashing art styles, almost offensive color palettes, and the colorless, sketchbook-style character design evoke a sense of discomfort and generally off vibes. Enemy designs look demented but also somewhat goofy. They seem to occupy an entirely separate space, but in a meta kind of way, their designs fit too. The almost lo-fi pixel art gives just enough to latch onto, but is also minimal enough to let your imagination run moderately wild. The minimalistic presentation has a sort of subtle psychological effect. The atmosphere in every zone contains a prevailing sense of dread. The contrast of the colorless characters and the vibrant, discordant color combinations is the most obvious sign that something is wrong with this world. Offhand, you can't quite put your finger on it, but yeah, it's there. As far as the music goes, I can't really speak to the original soundtrack as I've never played Off's original 2008 version. Apparently, there were some issues with licensing or copyright, so it had to be redone for the remaster, even involving Toby Fox, the creator of Undertale, who composed a couple of the tracks. I thought the soundtrack did a decent job of contributing to the atmosphere and vibes of the game. Will the soundtrack be one of the first things that come to mind whenever I think about this game in the future? Probably not. Still, it's clear that the music of Off is crucial to its identity. I might not scramble to revisit the soundtrack like some of my other favorite games, and yet, the one thing that might haunt my dreams is the ambient noises that play in the pure zones, which are what the original zones turn into once you defeat their guardians. Either way, it's still a significant part of the whole package that is the bizarre world of Off. In a nutshell, Off is offbeat and has officially birthed many offspring in the indie RPG space. It's a game that unapologetically interrogates concepts of morality, breaks the fourth wall, and forces the player to confront life's more unpleasant aspects. I see why so many newer RPG Maker hits draw inspiration from this game. While I only know of the differences from the original release due to watching other people's videos, having a more modernized version with more accessibility options and a more streamlined combat system is notable, especially since it exposes the game to more people who otherwise wouldn't have given it a second thought, let alone even know of its existence. One of my only minor complaints, besides the game's length, is how easily it shows its age. While better than before, the combat still feels shallow, and the game's overall structure can leave you wanting more if you're used to newer games with a bit more complexity. If those are deal breakers for you, you may hesitate to try this game. Even still, I might argue and say you're kinda missing out. The foreboding aura, outlandish art style, and commitment to its central themes are all standouts that have stood the test of time. Clearly, my time with Off was absolutely surreal. Some games nowadays can't even offer an experience in the same ballpark. Anyway, that was my journey through Off. If you made it this far, I truly thank you for watching. I'd hella appreciate it if you gave the video a thumbs up and you went ahead and subscribed for more indie game coverage. If you've played the original Off, the remaster, or both, sound off in the comments. I'd love to hear from longtime fans, especially since I know the game has a cult following online. That's it for now, y'all. See you in the next video. Peace out.